Just a quick video to go through the factors that determine the price elasticity of demand for a product. So let's just remind ourselves about what we mean by price elasticity of demand. We know that as the price changes, the quantity demand will change. We know when the price rises, the quantity demand will fall, and when the price falls, the quantity demanded will rise. So we know there's a negative correlation between price and the quantity demanded. But what we could also usefully consider is how negative that correlation is, or how responsive the quantity demanded is to a change in price. We can see by looking at these two diagrams that the demand can be either inelastic or elastic. So if the demand is inelastic, a relatively large change in the price will lead to a relatively small change in the quantity demanded. So here the PED value will be less than 1. On the second diagram there, we can see that a relatively small change in the price has led to a relatively large change in the quantity demanded. So here the PED value is greater than 1. So we can say that the demand for this product is elastic. So now we're going to draw a simple spider diagram that's going to list the major determinants of PED. They're the factors that determine the PED value for a product. Our first determinant is the availability of substitutes. If there are lots of close substitutes that are available and their price is very similar to the good that we're talking about, it's likely that its PED will be very elastic, because if the price of the good in question rises, consumers will just switch to one of those close substitutes. However, if there are no close substitutes available, the demand will be relatively inelastic, because consumers can't easily switch to a very similar or close alternative when the price of the good in question rises. So the PED will be very low. Our next determinant of PED is whether the good in question is a necessity or a luxury. If it's a necessity, consumers are going to have to carry on buying that product even though its price has risen. So the PED will be low, the demand will be inelastic. But if it's a luxury, it's not something that the consumers need. So if the price rises, consumers can stop buying that product, which means that the PED will be quite high. There will be elastic demand. So these two determinants that I've got written down on the spider diagram so far, the availability of substitutes and whether the good is a necessity or a luxury, are the ones that we could consider to be the most important. They're certainly the ones that I would be writing about first in any question about the determinants of elasticity. So these next three determinants might be considered the other determinants, as it were. They are significant, but they're not as significant as the availability of substitutes or the degree of necessity or luxury. So we'll start with the proportion of income spent on the product. If the product is very expensive and takes up a large proportion of the household's income, it's going to be very difficult for the household to carry on buying that product in the same quantity if the price rises. So things like family holidays, for example, might have a relatively elastic demand, because if the price of holidays were to increase by 10%, that would mean that many households could no longer afford them. Secondly, is the product addictive? If the product is addictive, people will carry on consuming that product even though the price has risen. So the demand for addictive products tends to be very low. They tend to have an inelastic demand. And finally, the breadth of definition. If something is very broadly defined, such as we're saying chocolate bars, for example, that's a broad definition, and if the price of all chocolate bars were to rise, we would probably carry on buying almost as many chocolate bars as we did before. However, if the price of just one of those chocolate bars, let's say a Mars bar, were to increase, and the price of all other chocolate bars were to stay the same, that would have a significant impact on our demand for Mars bars. Therefore, if it's narrowly defined, the elasticity tends to be high, and if it's broadly defined, the elasticity tends to be low. So just to finish off, it's really important when you're talking about price elasticity of demand, not just to say whether the elasticity is likely to be high or low, but to explain why it's likely to be high or low. So the factors that determine PED, or the determinants of PED, are really important when you're answering written questions on this particular topic area. I hope you found that useful.